your health and your mindset is really intrinsically tied to not only the quality, but also the fulfillment aspect of your life. And so my mission is to remind folks that this is tied to this, and this is tied to everything else. So we just want to be able to be mindful and monitor, how am I sleeping? How am I eating? How am I moving? And how am I thinking?
Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Keynote Curators Podcast. I'm Seth Deckman, your Keynote Curator. Our guest today has mastered the pivot from ice to the boardroom. Apolo Ohno, an 8-time Olympic medalist turned best-selling author and performance coach. And if resilience were a sport, he'd have gold in that too. Apolo, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Seth. It's good to see you again. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's good to see you again. I know less than a year ago we were together. We had a great time. I want to get right into it. People often ask you about your achievements in the Olympics, what you've been able to achieve and accomplish athletically. But I want to get some down to business about snacks. I mean, I know you love your snacks.
Yeah, of course.
One of my daughters, we have a joke in the house where she loves her snacks, you know? Talk to us about what's going on in the world of snacks and Apolo Ohno. I'm sorry.
Look, it's funny you say that. I mean, everyone loves snacks. I probably go in cycles of when I'm snacking and when I'm not snacking. I invest into health and wellness and CPG, consumer packaged goods companies. So I invest into companies that are traditionally reinventing old food categories that I grew up eating, whether it's Jell-O, whether it's gum, whether it's ramen, gummies, and just trying to create something that's a little bit more healthy, less food dyes, more natural juices and flavors and products and such. So snacks, I think most kids love snacks. When we were growing up in the world of speed skating, we were pretty strict on our diet. But, when I would do these, I remember we would do these Nike or NBC shoots. And I remember someone telling me a long time ago that Lance Armstrong only had one request. And I actually never asked Lance this. I should actually ask him this. His only request is that they had peanut M&Ms available in a bowl at whatever these photo shoots or events. And so, I put that in my writer. I was like, well, I'd like to have peanut M&Ms. And then over time, that became a little bit of a challenge, obviously, with training and such. But, it's fun.
Right. So you've invested in a lot of different companies in bringing the health and well-being to snacks, which, pull it out on a bigger picture. I mean, you're an elite performer, rarefied air. This is not blowing smoke up your butt. You've had incredible, Olympic career. But this is something that's been a through line for you as far as, being a stand for health and well-being. I mean, in our conversations, the last time we were together, you poignantly asked me about what my routine is, a little bit about my sleep, a little bit about my diet. And very quickly, you were able to dial in. How much of your day does that consume versus, other activities?
Well, I remember our conversation explicitly. I think that I have a natural propensity to always lean into people's lifestyles, right? It was a part of my life without thinking about it. So the 4 pillars of health, like how you sleep, how you eat, how you move, and how you think. So your social environment, psychologically, who you see in the mirror. But those 4 pillars are like the table legs to a table. And while they don't have to be perfect, I always like to try to nudge and hopefully spark some inspiration in people whenever I meet them to remind them of these 4 basic tools that they have complete control over. Now, not entirely. If you've got a newborn, you've got kids, you're busy, you got a lot of workload. Obviously, some of these things suffer, but we're not seeking perfection. We're seeking progress in these areas. So we just want to be able to be mindful and monitor, how am I sleeping? How am I eating? How am I moving? And how am I thinking? So in terms of how does it take up my day, I mean, these are things that are prerequisites for how I operate. Now, again, I spend a lot of time on the road. I speak to a lot of the companies that you represent and have great relationships with. And a lot of times we're cross-traveling back and forth where sleep is not optimal. Airplane food is obviously most of the time not edible. I hate to say that. And then, when you just have environments that are not conducive to being your best performance self. So the Apolo Ohno from my Olympic days was fine-tuned down to the millimeter of extracting the highest amount of performance, both mentally and physically. But now I'm in the real world and I don't have access to a lot of those things. And while I can try to control the input source of food and et cetera, I'm in a new hotel room. Maybe someone next door is super loud or on a call. Maybe there's kids running in the hall. There's things that are outside of my control. And so there's this relinquishing of surrender, I guess, or surrendering to this situation and outcome, and then settling back in and saying, I still need to perform. But more importantly, it's just about, I think most of us, this is probably post COVID, where there was a realization that your health and your mindset is really intrinsically tied to not only the quality, but also the fulfillment aspect of your life. And so my mission is to remind folks that this is tied to this, and this is tied to everything else. And so just being able to make those small incremental changes in your daily personal life can dramatically impact the way that you show up in the corporate boardroom, in the
Yeah.
entrepreneurial aspect.
Yeah.
And people read that energy, Seth. Like if you have a really bad week, that's psychologically, subconsciously going to be affecting the way that you
Yeah.
perform. So how do we mitigate some of these things in a way where we can still show up and people can read and feel that energy in the most positive perspective that gives us access to the goal that we ultimately want?
Yeah. It's there's a phrase, I'm going to try to connect this. Knowing doesn't make a difference. I know I shouldn't eat this, or I know I shouldn't do this, and
Yeah.
knowing it doesn't make a difference. It's like, what is the difference that from knowing to either avoiding or doing what you know you should be doing? And should is also a troubling word. But in our conversation, we're walking to the sound check, and you were casually, it's natural to you, asked me about this and that. And I talked about these long walks I was going on and how incredibly satisfying they were for me and in every level. But sleep was my area.
Mm.
And I just want to report back to you a couple of things. I had a door in my bedroom that, when the place was built, had a door into my home office. I've sealed that off. We took the door frame out, we took the door off, we put the drywall in. So that's like, now it's sanctuary. We
Mm.
now have, we had a beautiful like linen curtain, but it wasn't dark enough. So we've done that. And, this is some things that I've been percolating, but knowing that I need to do it and it didn't make a difference, speaking with you and a couple of others, the sum of these conversations, I've removed the cell phone once I hit the sheets completely from my
Ooh,
room.
that's the hard one.
And it's a hard one. I have clients in Hong Kong, I have clients in Tokyo, I'm working with a group in Korea right now. And it's the time difference. And look, I have a luxury where I can afford it. Somebody on my team is now in that part of the country where they can, handle any request or any things that need attention. But I notice I sound like the commercial for what you're saying. I notice a difference. Even if I'm up at 5 o'clock in the morning, I'm rested. I don't have the screen in my face. The light's not coming in. That door isn't like feng shui staring at me, It's just really interesting. So, thank you. Thank you for,
Yeah. Hey, sleep is the number one performance enhancement tool that we have. It drains this kind of buildup of amyloid plaque, that the gray matter in your brain that could lead to really debilitating disease later on in your life. It is all these incredible cleansing and, just regeneration processes that are not replicated without extreme exercise or sauna. We can get a little bit of similarity, but there's just something about being renewed and refreshed. And the older
yeah,
that we get, we typically sleep lower quality and we feel like we need less sleep, which is a very backwards kind of thing, right? You feel like as we grow older, we need to regenerate more. We have less energy. And there's something to do. I think there's a lot of studies that are going about this, but yeah, sleep is serious, man. This is like,
yeah,
look, anyone who's listening to this, if you can tackle the sleep thing, here's the cascading effect. If your diet is poor, it's usually tied a large part not only to your willpower and your decision making process, but also when you sleep a lower amount of hours that you actually need and required, the hormone, the ghrelin hormone that sends a signal to the brain from the gut and the stomach, is telling you that you're hungry when you're not hungry. So you're getting these hormonal signals to your brain that you can't control because you did not have sufficient sleep. And then the whole cycle repeats. I
yeah,
mean, you start eating poorly, eating more
yeah,
sugar, you have these crashes, you're having more caffeine, which then affects less sleep REM. It's just like this weird cascading effect. And so sometimes we just have to like look at the situation and say, all right, I need to detach for a bit. It's going to suck for a couple of days while I kind of reconfigure this and reset. But when you reset, it's like this moment where you just feel good, And I love it, man. People are different when they feel good and they bring that energy to a conversation.
And our audience who is watching, who is listening, and just thanks for being here. They come for this kind of content. A lot of them are event planners, not all of them. And Paulo, you're with them all the time, and you know how they wear every hat, the chief cook, the bottle washer, and everything in between. And they've had long days. They're on their feet. You know, sleep is a real luxury at times for them. So they can definitely relate to this. And, you know, at the time of this recording, the French Open is going on and Djokovic is getting a lot of press. And I don't know if you saw a while back, he did a 60 minutes. It was a really lovely piece, about 15-minute segment on him. And they asked him, how do you prepare? Like, what is your preparation for your next match? And without hesitation, stone cold, he goes, I sleep. And I mean, there were other things that he talked about, but he goes, it starts the night before. It starts the day before when I go to bed, and it all starts with a good rest. And it's not like, oh, this grip or this second serve on the ad side, or, you know, I'm going to only hit up the middle. It literally had to do with exactly what you're talking about. So it's pretty cool. I want to turn the corner a little bit here and not take a whole trip down memory lane, but I think it would be useful for our audience, our listeners, and our viewers if you could just distinguish that moment where the reporter says to you after you fell, you lost. And what was the phrase you used? I didn't lose the gold.
I won the silver.
Can you walk us through that moment? Because it's such a poignant anecdote.
Yeah. So for those who don't have context, I was in my first Olympic Games. I was the kind of medal contender. I was the cover of Sports Illustrated. I was the favorite to win this race. Previous year,
he was also, I'm sorry, in the Olympic Village, there was an athlete poll, informal poll. You won best hair as well, I think. So you had that momentum going into the heat, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I had ridiculous facial hair, this like really, you know, big goatee, like my hair was long and wavy.
Hey, you were having fun.
I was prime. Yeah. So in my first Olympic final, I had won this race many times in the year prior. I was the favorite with like a quarter lap remaining. Actually, I was in the lead, and then an athlete had fallen into the side of me, and we had all fallen into the pads. Scrambled to my feet, threw my skates across the finish line to finish. Didn't know what place I had received. Ended up winning the silver. Was discombobulated, didn't understand what was going on. It was disarray. You know, my first natural reaction was anger, resentment, rage, unfair. I wanted to point the finger, which is normal and natural. It's a human natural reaction, right? You train a lifetime for this moment, and you feel like someone else had stolen it from you. And while that was not entirely true, that's the feelings that you have. And those feelings are real. And so while I had a little bit of time to process this information, I went to the coach, to the heat box. And then I went to the locker room, and I remember someone coming in and telling me like, oh, this race was amazing. Like, how did you get back up? So immediately that was the first signal. It's like, oh, the perception of what just happened is different from a different point of view. Someone else wasn't focused on me losing the gold. They were so enamored by the fact that I was able to scramble to my feet instinctually and finish the race. Then I saw my father next, and he was like, that was amazing. You did so well. You should be so proud of yourself. So it was this cascading effect of confirmation that I did well. And as I was walking out to the medal ceremony, like 10 minutes later, and you know, one of these reporters had kind of shoved the microphone in my face and said, like, how does it feel to have lost the gold? Right. Which is, a pretty aggressive question, but also one that is a good question.
And it's aggressive. It's loaded. I guess it's expected.
Yeah. And they teach you through media training you want to draw out the raw emotion of the moment, which is exactly what that question is. Like, look, how does it feel that you almost won the gold and you lost it, you know? And I, for some reason, as this 19-year-old kid who was me going on 15, I always joke, I somehow blurted out, I didn't lose the gold, I won the silver. And that was a moment in time, I think, for America, where America had been somewhat brought to a knee from the attacks, 6 months prior in September 2001, September 11th. And it was the first time where we had this unilateral support around America. People wanted to have this deep love of patriotism, of unification of the country. And it's this beautiful moment. And so I didn't know the effect of what was going to happen by saying that, but this thing had resonated through me. And I chose to respond versus react. Because if someone had asked me immediately after I had stopped, I probably would have not said that. Because
Right.
there was time
Yeah.
to be able to process this and get perspective, that was the learning lesson, Seth, is that when we can train ourselves to respond versus react right away, and sometimes we don't have a choice, we have to react, right? And you're in the midst of whatever that is. But we should always be urging ourselves and pushing ourselves to respond, because response is the small space that gives you time to contemplate, to not hesitate, but just absorb and marinate for a second. And your response is much more conducive to the goal that you're actually trying to achieve, versus your reaction can be very defensive. It can be out of anger. It can be out of whatever stuff. And it typically is not tied to the outcome that you desire. And by doing that, what it was doing to my brain was retraining my brain to be in a state of gratitude for the opportunity to represent the United States, to compete my heart out, and still celebrate this win or this achievement or race, regardless of the outcome, even though I wanted to win, even though I was so competitive. And obviously, my goal was, the color of the medal was to be gold, not silver, but there has to be a surrendering to a particular result or outcome. Only upon that surrender to this result, because in 50 years, there's no asterisk next to my name that says Apollo Ono should have won this race, but he was taken
Right.
down by another athlete. Therefore, he was so, none of that. It's just names and dates and times. And so, in accordance with that, is this kind of classical masterclass of Stoicism: control what you can, disregard what you cannot. And to me today, many years later, right? I mean, 20 plus years later, this is like the metaphor for my life: is prepare relentlessly for whatever it is that I'm trying to accomplish, give all of myself to that thing, and then use that muscle memory and trust in the process. And if the result is not what I got, that's okay. Let's recalibrate, reconfigure, and then re-engage after we understand what had happened.
And there is that through line of stoicism there. You know, every time I hear the story, there's a different aspect that really speaks to me, whether it's because, you know, I'm in a certain part of fatherhood where your
Mm,
father is a character in the
yeah,
in the story, or the language that you use, or the concept of respond versus react. There's just so many realms of that story that speak to me. Because look, among many things, you're a keynote speaker and you know how important words are, and you deliver an impeccable, you know, really a real, authentic, connectable speech.
thank you.
The keynote, it's very rich. And at the Keynote Curators, we believe that words and speeches can change the world. And it's just a fact. That's where we stand. It's aspirational, it's high-minded, but for me it lives as truth. And that distinction, Apollo, of responding versus reaction, subtle but so gigantic. I almost want to say it, gigantesco, like in Spanish it sounds more dramatic, you know,
It
but
does.
it's just enormous,
Mm,
because one is impulsive, one is chemical,
mm,
and one is guttural, you know, and the other
mm,
one is take that beat. Unless somebody is literally like, you have to put your finger on a vein because they're losing blood, there's
mhm.
no like, take a beat, you know, take accounting of the situation. It's just so thanks for sharing that. Again, I know you've told it many, many times, but it's just so rich.
I mean, I share it because it's also a reminder to me, and I'm sure you've heard this, right? Keynote speaking, engagement with audiences is as much about reminders and personal therapy as it is about me sharing my own authentic journey, about my own personal struggles. And then that, I think that is the through line, is that we share the commonality of this psychological prison that we sometimes live within our own 2 years, or we can revert that into this amazing high performance asset that is irreplaceable on the planet. And the goal is to to push ourselves towards that ladder.
For sure. I mean, it strikes me, you know, I said earlier the phrase, I know knowing doesn't make a difference, or you've had a coach. I've had it in tennis and basketball where, you know, they've been saying one thing on and on and on, and I go off to another camp somewhere, or a coach gets replaced and they're saying the same thing, but I hear it differently. You know, talk about reminder, you talk about revisiting the same idea, but you're a different person, a different human being, and you hear it differently, and you hear yourself differently. So, you know, well pointed out. I want to go back to the health and well-being and tie it in a
Yeah.
little bit to, way more about science, and it's true. But one of the things you struck me was about the gut and the connection to the mind and your diet and your rest. And I find it fascinating that, while the brain is the HQ headquarters for our neurological
Mhm.
life, if you will, the first nerves and neurons were in the gut as we evolved out of a
The second
tadpole
brain.
and amoeba.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating as a layman and a real, pedestrian scientist, that there is still that connection there. I offer this to you to land the plane. Mental health, it's important to all of us. I'd love to get your take on that. And, the connection to the well being and the science behind it, and what you could offer to our viewers, our audience, some things that might be useful that could have an immediate big impact.
Whew. Well, mental health is a massive part of society. It was never talked about before. Probably pre-COVID, it was very little. It was, if there was mental health, it was much more from our world in the realms of sports psychology and sports performance. So, AKA, how do we visualize, manifest, prepare psychologically so that you can earn more medals? Not about what happens after identity loss or fears of failure or insecurities or self doubt or negative self talk. That stuff was only related to performance, not in terms of the holistic entire human experience that is today. And so all of us bring stuff to the table, whether it's past traumatic experiences in life, things that have just been deeply ingrained in our psyche from childhood, typically. And these things show up in our life in many different ways. How we express rage and anger and emotion and happiness and joy. And a lot of our time we spend in our own head, this internal dialogue. And so mental health is really important to me, but more important to me of delineating the difference between, you need to be in this state where you understand that friction is good and we can lean into that friction for long durations of time without being burned out, because of what that does to the brain, the neurochemical and the neurological process to actually form new processes and new learning behaviors and mechanisms. And also just reinforcing that the hard work is actually the shortcut. So there's this dance between, I need to disengage and detach and give myself time to kind of not be in this like fight or flight mode 24/7, and allow myself to kind of take a step back and survey where I've been and understand if I'm going the right direction, but while also leaning into those moments. And so that is also the challenge of the youth today. And I'm assuming that every older generation faces this. My life was much harder than yours. You don't have the mental toughness. You're very entitled, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right.
Right, right.
And
Ad nauseum.
yeah, ad nauseum. And everyone in this, sub 20, sub 25 age group has access to these dopamine digiceuticals on their phone. They're just being fed all day, every day, whether kids are sucking on these vapes every 2 minutes, or they're popping in, more caffeine, or they're popping in more nicotine pouches. These are all hits of like neurochemical responses instantly. You order something on Amazon, you get a like on your social pages. All this stuff is happening. And so the human experience is changing over time. And while I'm not saying lean away from most of those things, although I'm not a fan of smoking, I do think that the most important thing we can do is recognize that these other digital tools are tools, and we should not be mined
Right.
by these tools for our time and energy, because you're just giving away your most natural, precious resource that you have that is finite. You're just giving away the building blocks of your life. The last 20 years of your life are not as high quality as the first 40 to 60. That's the reality. And so if we have this, life map, mental health is really important. Who you surround yourself with, the environment that you are actually in, spending time in nature if you can, even if it's a walk outside and getting, you know, some sunshine through the cloud break, I mean, whatever it is, that's a really important part of the human experience. And so my belief is that the gut is tied to how you feel. In Asian culture, the gut is a primary means of being healthy. And so if your gut is not healthy, you cannot think properly. So if you're constipated, or you're not digesting properly, or you're always bloated, these are things that this stuff sucks, right? You don't feel good. And it's even if you can power through these things, you're just not going to perform well. And that's
Right.
why
You're
I always,
sluggish. Yeah.
yeah, you're sluggish, you feel foggy, you're lethargic, you need more coffee, you just feel tired. So again, like the human bodied experience is driven by energy. And if there's a blockage of that energy in the gut or anywhere else in the system, it's not going to have this through line that is really clean so that energy can be performing at all times. So as an athlete, people don't know this, but gut health in athletes is a really big issue. The higher the intensity and duration, the more the gut microbiome actually changes on a day-to-day basis on these athletes. And so the right types of foods to make sure that that environment is healthy is really important. Anyway, without getting too like, in the weeds
No,
there with that.
look, I think our audience and our viewers track this because this has been a through line for us on a lot of episodes. We've had guests who have talked about microplastics or,
Yeah.
toxicity. And, it's just kids in utero, they're born and their urine sample already has phthalates and, bisphenol A in it, and they're 3 minutes old, you know?
Yeah.
So it's something that, our audience is interested in. So you can nerd out on it all the way. But I think coming from you, although you're not a scientist yet officially,
I'm definitely not a scientist.
you're definitely not a scientist, but you play one on this podcast, so that counts for something.
I mean, look, I have experience from the Olympic world, real world experience. I obviously read and consume much of the information I receive from experts who are far greater than I. Peer-reviewed studies. We try to get access to these things. And my goal too is just how do I create a more richer, fuller, high quality life? So how do I impact the years in my life? More importantly, how do I impact the life in those years? Right? That's really important. So if I live to be
Yeah.
100, that's amazing. But if the quality of the life for the last 30 years is very low, I kind of just want to have like a really rich, fulfilling part of that. And so the relationships that we keep are really important. The communication aspect of your close peer group, your social environments, your work environments, these things are all critical to the fulfillment and longevity markers of who you are as a person. The love and the purpose of what you do with your family is a huge marker of happiness. And they always say, I love this one, comparison is the thief of joy.
Yeah.
Right. And so we live in a world where we're competitive. And I think that having some comparable analytics is a critical piece to understanding, are we playing the game appropriately? And if we are, how do I measure up to the competition? But, on the other side, I think the real understanding is I'm living my own experience. I need to identify what are the critical, most key things of the main thing that I can do to keep the main thing always, whether that's your faith, your family, and then how do these other aspects tie into that? And it's easy to get just distracted, the world is full of distractions.
Yeah.
To take your time and energy.
Especially at the click of a button or the drawing of a vape or whatever, these dopamine hits. I mean, if everything is dopamine, then nothing is dopamine at some point.
That's right. And I always say, like, preserve the dopamine, because that is, there's a great podcaster, Andrew Huberman. He talks extensively about using the power of dopamine. And I love the way that he blends his approach of using diets and peer-reviewed research and using the dopamine crisis as a way to actually enact and engage drive and resilience and strength. And he does it so beautifully. And so it's a reminder that this mechanism is this amazing pharmaceutical bin, chemicals and hormones and responses. And we can actually change this through just certain types of behavioral tools that are small and minute, and done over time, they compound for these radically huge differences in the way that we live our life. And that's what we like. The problem, Seth, is that we've been taught and trained through these dopamine devices, through this world of instantaneous feedback and gratification. That's not the long road, right? I want to take the shortcut. I want the short thing now. And I think the right path is, yes, you can accelerate, you can move, you can quantum leap forward, but how do you lean into the stuff that's difficult? And that is where the real gold mine is when you kind of treacherously go through this thing over long durations of time. You're just retraining your brain to enact in the process versus the prize. Because when you make these goals at the beginning of the year, They're like sexy, they're fun, they're big. The vision board is amazing. I'm going to do this. I'm going to have this much money. I'm going to fly
Right.
here. That stuff is the end result. But the process is the most critical piece here. And that's the thing that you fall back upon when the sexiness and the motivation fades of making a vision board,
Yeah.
you know?
Well, it's like, I've heard this phrase, boring is sexy. I don't know if it's age. I'm 58, Apollo, but I'm finding, and whether it's literally the chemical dopamine hit or not, I'm
Mm,
finding more joy in the process
mm,
than the
right.
actual getting the milestone. I love it to get to the milestone. I do measure certain things in my physical activity, in my training and stuff like that. But I love the process. And it could be just, my age, but I've discovered that in myself. I wasn't always aware of it.
The process is difficult to lean into, but I think if we can do an analysis of people who we find very successful in all of our different niches of business, right? Whether it's in hospitality, event planning, speaking, entertainment, real estate, whatever the industry is, I think the commonality is that those who do really well are the ones that love playing the game. It's hard to beat someone who just loves playing the
Yeah.
game
Yeah.
every dang day, right?
Yeah.
If it's a struggle to play the game and you just really aren't enjoying it, you can probably do okay, but you won't be your best great self. And so identifying the elements of the game that you really like to lean into and then realize it's never perfect, right? Like not everyone can be a rock star for 50 years like Kiss or whoever these bands are, Bon Jovi, and still play many, many years later and still be celebrated doing what he loves and is
That's
the
right.
best at it. That's very
Yeah.
rare, right? So
Yeah.
athletes the perfect example. You do something great for like 10 years, maybe 15, maybe 20, and then there's a new identity that has to be formed. And me going around in circles in spandex is not exactly the most conducive to a boardroom or an investment meeting, right? Like it's got some
Right.
similarities of like
Not
understandings
not
of life.
today. Not today. It was, but not today for you.
Not today. I mean, it may get some laughs if I show up in the boardroom with like a skin
Right.
suit on, racing suit. So anyway, yeah, you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, totally. I think that you touched on some really important points in a way that, like your keynote, that our audience can really take away and deliver it. And that's why they come here. I'd love to hear from everybody in in the comments about where you're having breakthroughs or struggling, whether it's with sleep, nutrition, your achievements, any breakdowns, breakthroughs. Our community loves to participate there. We're going to put all of Apollo's information in the show notes as well. We're going to leave it there for the moment. I know you're around the corner. Next year, you're going to be heading off to Milan for the Winter Olympics, and then you have LA and Salt Lake and on, and you're very involved with that. So we look forward to following you and being connected with you as you attend all those events and participate and make your contributions there.
Yeah.
So just thanks for being with us today on the podcast, for the work you do. And we're just so grateful to have had you as a guest. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for chatting, Seth.
You got it. And to our audience, thanks for continuing to come and listen and engage with us. We really appreciate it. And we'll see you next time.